Story 1. One of my coworkers told me, I saw a video the other day that made me think of you, and then described it to me. It's really hard for me to conceptualize that people I'm not family or friends with actually think about me. The confirmation is really nice and makes me feel cared for. Story 2. I was going through a breakup and chose to keep the nice apartment I worked hard to find and love. I was determined to make it work. During the time I was figuring out my finances, there was a period when I chose bills over lunch at work. I wasn't having a great time. One of my coworkers, with whom I occasionally ate lunch, asked me one day when the last time I ate was, as I picked at popcorn available in my corporate cafeteria while sitting with him. I probably blushed and told him I had dinner a couple of days ago. He handed me his card and told me to go get lunch so I could properly eat with him. He never said anything about it or made me feel embarrassed. Over a decade later, we are still friends, as he is now part of my husband's extended friend group. I will always have a soft spot for him. It meant a lot to me in that moment. Story 3. I was at a Pret shop in London 11 years ago at my lowest, and I had been looking forward to my favorite sandwich all day. I couldn't find it on the shelf because it was the end of the day and the shop was emptying, so I asked the person there nicely. He told me that unfortunately they were out for the day. I just said, "Oh, that's okay. Thank you," and kept browsing for something else. But I must have looked truly sad because the person came back a couple of minutes later and asked me if I was okay waiting 5 minutes. They had found enough ingredients to make me one if I would just wait. I was so happy. I must have looked so incredibly happy that they would make me a sandwich. The barista came up to me and asked if I wanted a hot drink on the house. I said yes, please, a cappuccino. He drew a really pretty and careful heart on it with chocolate powder. It was a truly terrible year, and London is a difficult city to be alone and broke and unhappy in. But those small gestures made me feel so much better. I will never forget it. Story 4. I was at work, focusing on a task, when a little girl came up to me and said, "Excuse me, I like your hair. I am 33 years old, and I think this may be the first time anyone has ever complimented my appearance." It really made my day. Story 5. Back when I lived with my sister, I was headed to a concert 4 hours away with a friend. I would be back home extremely late. I had class the next morning, and on top of that, a huge lab report to finish. We had started some laundry with our bedding before I left, but it wasn't finished in time for me to make my bed. Late that night, when I stumbled in exhausted after a very long drive, I found my bed already made. My sister had done it for me while I was out having fun, just because she knew it would be difficult to come home and have to do it before getting to sleep. It was probably a small act to her, but it meant the world to me that night. Years later, I still think about it and the consideration she had for me. Story 6. I have always had body confidence issues, and it has taken a lot for me to feel comfortable in a swimsuit. A couple of years ago, while at the beach, I felt as though everyone was looking at me and thinking about how awful I looked. Then a woman approached me and complimented my swimsuit, saying it suited me. It was an instant confidence boost that helped me relax and enjoy my day at the beach. Story 7. It was September 12, 2001. My ex-husband moved out the day before, taking all our furniture, even the refrigerator and food. He left me an empty house with an ice pack. I was devastated. The next day at work, my friend asked for the keys to my car, and later that day, when I got off work, he and my coworkers had gone to a warehouse store and filled my car with essentials and food. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me and my son. It wasn't a small gesture but was heartfelt and kind. Story 8. I worked as a firefighter years ago before I was medically discharged. We responded to a house fire, and the woman was nearly hysterical over her home being ablaze. Her young son, who was about 8, said, "Don't worry, Mom. The firefighters are here." To this day, I nearly tear up thinking about that. Story 9. I was pregnant at university in a state I wasn't from. I had student loans and grants to cover most of the tuition but not much extra. One of my classmates, who wasn't particularly interested in babies, threw me a surprise baby shower. It was really sweet. Since we didn't know the gender until birth, all the gifts were practical items. I still think about her effort and my classmates' contributions that helped me when I needed it the most. During that same time, I responded to a post from someone giving away baby items. I went to pick them up and was astounded by how many she had. Upon returning home, I sent her a thank you note expressing my gratitude. She later messaged me back asking if I wanted even more items. That's how my baby got her bassinet. We paid it forward by giving away all of her baby items, including the ones we purchased, to other mothers for free. Story 10. When someone, often the quieter person, tries to say something in a group setting and gets cut off, another person acknowledges they were trying to speak and asks what they were going to say at the next conversation break. Story 11. When friends save me a seat without me even asking, it is a small thing, but it makes me feel like I matter to them. Story 12. In the 10th grade, I got a haircut, changing my almost waist-length hair to a long bob just at my shoulders. A boy complimented it in a completely non-flirtatious way. He was sincere and respectful about it, and I was not used to being treated that way. Most interactions were either sarcastic, a play at flattery, or clearly just out of obligation. This experience changed how I viewed interactions with men. It was 20 years ago, and now when I get a haircut, I go for a similar length. John C., if you read this, I still think you should run for president. Story 13. In 2019, I went to the emergency room and told them I had concrete plans and the means to end my life, but that I was having second thoughts and wanted to try some kind of intervention. I was afraid of being alone because, even though I had made the choice to get help, I still didn't fully believe it was the right one. I felt like suicide was still very much an option. They left me alone in the emergency room waiting area for 14 hours overnight, and no one even checked on me. I could have left and overdosed on the sidewalk outside at any point. As I tried to get some sleep spread out across two chairs that both had armrests, I considered just walking out, even though I knew what would probably happen if I did. I wasn't the only one waiting for hours, and at some point in the middle of the night, the staff rolled out a cart of blankets, but I couldn't muster up the will to get one. Next thing I knew, I felt someone draping a blanket over me, and when I opened my eyes, the man handed me another one to use as a pillow. I had taken my glasses off and was basically delirious at that point, so to this day, I could not tell you what that man looked like. Every time things get bad, I think about him, even just in passing. Every few years, I'm tempted to go online to try to find this man, but I have nowhere to start because I can't describe a single physical attribute beyond man, probably older than 35. He saved my life, though. Story 14. I had emergency surgery for an ectopic pregnancy, which was completely unexpected. I was in the operating room, surrounded by medical staff and stainless steel equipment, and I felt quite scared. A nurse knelt beside me and asked how I was feeling. I expressed my fear of waking up during the surgery. He promised that I wouldn't, and something about that interaction made me feel seen as a person. He took the time to make me comfortable before I was anesthetized. Story 15. A friend I hadn't seen in a while approached me after my son passed away. He explained that he saw someone he thought was me and felt nervous because he didn't know what to say or do. He was upset about his reaction and decided that the only thing he could do was give me a hug. He then said, "So I'm going to give you a hug now," and embraced me with one of the most sincere, heartfelt hugs I've ever received. To him, it wasn't a big deal, but to me, the idea that someone cared so deeply about my pain and took the time to consider how to respond was incredibly encouraging and humbling. It felt as if all the hurt he experienced for me and for the loss of my son amplified the meaning of that hug. Story 16. I flew with my son when he was 11 weeks old, just the two of us. I was a first-time mother, juggling all the gear and anxiety along with this little one. A flight attendant offered to hold him while I got settled. She not only held him, but also carried him up and down the aisle greeting passengers. She seemed genuinely happy to take him for a bit. By the time she brought him back, I had stowed all my gear and had a few minutes to just breathe. I wish I had gotten her name. My son is now 13, and I still tear up a little when I remember her kindness. Story 17. I had the usual parents who believed that yelling instructions would help me understand better. In my mid-teens, I went to a friend's house where there was a group of kids and their parents. One of the dads, whom I knew, took the time to teach me how to tie a tie. I had never learned how to do it and I messed up many times. I was openly crying and shaking from frustration, but he calmly continued to teach me until I finally got it. Story 18. My friend died. Her 7-year-old daughter died. Their bodies were found dumped in a ditch. They were drugged and strangled in an act of domestic violence. I was flying to their funerals and had lost faith in humanity. I stopped at a cafe to get a coffee before my flight. My hands were full with luggage, and I was struggling to get the insulator wrap around my coffee cup when a stranger came by and put it on my cup for me. I suddenly realized humanity wasn't all bad. I started crying right there at the airport. You never know how much one small gesture of kindness might mean to someone. Story 19. I was at a store getting shoes for my daughter, and we both commented on a purple backpack we liked. After checking out, I said, "Let's go look at the turtles in the pet store next door." While looking at the turtles, a young man in his 20s found us and had the purple backpack in hand. He said he wanted her to have the best school year possible and handed it to her after asking me if that was okay. I think about this young man all the time. It was such a kind thing to do for a little kid. Story 20. I used to work at one of the busiest Trader Joe's in the United States, and I was just trying to get through my time at the register when a customer said to me, "I hope you are as kind to yourself as you are to others." That stuck with me. Story 21. Happened literally less than an hour ago. I was having a pretty bad day mentally, but when I struggled to lift my duffel bag into the overhead compartment on the train, the couple sitting in the row in front of me both got up to help. It wasn't much, but in that moment, I really needed it, and it reminded me that the world can be kind too. Story 22. I was standing on a train platform, fighting some of the strongest urges I had in a while. A lady approached me, giving a large wave to get my attention. "I love your shoes. They are nice." I was wearing a pair of Converse that I had colored myself with too many Sharpies. One was blue and one was purple. I was so overwhelmed by her comment and her warm smile that I was locked in place until the next train arrived, and I got on to head home. That comment possibly saved my life in that moment, and it has brought a smile to my face many times since. I am incredibly grateful for the kindness of a stranger I have never seen again. Story 23. I am getting divorced and had previously mentioned at work how excited I was to have my name back. One day, my coworker asked if I wanted him to change my last name to my maiden name on my customer profile in our point-of-sale system, something I hadn't even considered. His thoughtfulness in remembering and offering to help was such a small gesture, but it made me feel loved and grateful. Story 24. To every good man who ever came up and said, "Leave the lady alone." Thank you. It mattered every time. Story 25. My work's Secret Santa actually got me the one and only thing I asked for. Nobody has ever done that for me before. I have always wanted a proper birding journal, but I usually received soap, candles, chocolate, or alcohol. I don't drink. Honestly, I broke down crying in front of everyone. Story 26. After I had my daughter, who was born underweight and very tiny, I was trying to breastfeed her. A nurse helped me and told me that I had enough milk for twins. It really boosted my confidence because I always had small breasts and was afraid that I couldn't feed her. Story 27. When I first relocated from a small Midwest town to Austin as a single mom with 2 kids, it was a struggle. One of the first friends I made tucked $20 in an envelope with a note under my windshield wipers for me to find one morning. That was grocery money for us, and back then I could really stretch that $20. She is still a good friend, and I cherish her kindness. Story 28. I was working an overnight shift and training a new employee. I mentioned to her that during my break on previous shifts, I like to watch Forensic Files. On the second night we worked together, she turned the break room TV to Forensic Files. Seems small, but it really meant a lot, and she is such a kind person. This happened years ago, and I still think about it from time to time. Story 29. As a man with a few women as friends, I find it reassuring whenever they refer to me as girl. For example, they might say, "Girl, I'll need to take you there sometime." I've been involved in several conversations where they refer to me in this way, and it makes me feel nice that they can talk so comfortably and openly with me. Story 30. This gesture wasn't tiny, but definitely my favorite throughout my life. I was a broke college student, taking toilet paper from the student union and stashing food from the student buffet so I wouldn't be hungry at night. I couldn't afford a cell phone because my work-study job was only enough to buy hygiene products. My college was in a small city, so there were no jobs around, and I applied everywhere I could. I was wearing $2 flip-flops from Old Navy in the winter because it was all I could afford. I was home for Christmas break when my cousin, who was a couple of years older than me, asked why I was wearing flip-flops in the freezing rain, and I just started crying. I didn't know I felt so alone and embarrassed by my situation. The next day, when I woke up, my cousin and her younger sister had already bought me some tennis shoes. I felt so seen and thankful in that moment. I kept those shoes for years, long after I could no longer wear them. Story 31. When other drivers used to let me merge when I was first driving, I was scared. Merging was one of my fears. What if no one let me in and I got stuck at the end of the shoulder? Now, when I see other cars about to merge, I give them as much room as I can. Story 32. My partner told me that one of the things I did that meant a lot was when I put a towel in the tumble dryer to warm it up for her when she got out of the bath. Story 33. My first night waitressing on my own, I was running at full speed and always a step behind, dealing with rude customers. I had a very kind assistant manager who was running my drinks for me at the same time. That was incredibly kind, but what really touched me was when the last table of the night, a group of 12, seemed to notice I was overwhelmed. When I finally reached the table to introduce myself and take their drink order, a man around 60 at the head of the table gently grasped my wrist and said, "Don't worry, you're at the nice table now, and we are very patient. I'm paying the bill, and you will get a 50% tip no matter what happens." It was the touch on the wrist that moved me. Before he finished speaking, I burst out crying and had to run into the kitchen. After 2 minutes, I composed myself and gave that table my full attention. If you ever want to see someone cry, show them kindness during their most stressful moments. They will never forget you. I am now 39 years old, and this happened when I was 21. Story 34. Whenever I visit home and go out at night, I return to find that my mom has placed a hot water bottle in my bed to warm it up for me. I am 31 and she still does it. She also buys my favorite cheese and keeps it in the fridge for my arrival. Story 35. When someone, especially if I haven't had many interactions with them, remembers something about me that I thought was insignificant and didn't matter very much. Story 36. My daughter was 9 and wanted to get me a Christmas present. She chose a book from the dollar store about a subject I am interested in. It is hands down the best gift I have ever received. It showed that she cared about me and was aware of my interests. I have never experienced so much joy and appreciation from receiving a gift. It is truly simple but unforgettable. Story 37. I was just a kid. It was pouring rain after school. One of my neighbors offered me a ride home with his daughter. I'll never forget not feeling like a burden that day. The dad just wanted to help, and it was a huge contrast to my mom, who often made me feel guilty about needing rides anywhere. I'm not suggesting you accept a ride from anyone unfamiliar. He was a well-known neighbor, and I often saw their family happily enjoying a barbecue outside. Story 38. I was hungry and had to work full-time just to keep a roof over my head. One day, a coworker of mine took one look at me, went to lunch, and returned with a cheeseburger from McDonald's in a small serving bag. "I couldn't finish this, but I hate to waste it," they said, and handed it to me. I dislike cheese on burgers, but you better believe I ate that burger so fast I'm surprised I chewed. I have never forgotten that gesture. Story 39. I have quite a few memories, but one that stands out is when I was outside one morning with my coffee, hair unbrushed, in pajamas, no makeup. A man was walking in my neighborhood and strolled past my house. He then stopped and walked back to talk to me. Admittedly, my first thought was that he was going to offer lawn or tree services, which happened all the time in my old neighborhood. Instead, he said, "I just wanted to come back and tell you that you are an incredibly beautiful woman." It wasn't in a creepy or flirty way. I was so taken aback that I stammered a thank you, and then he went on his way. I was bullied a lot as a child and often called ugly. I know that I grew up to be somewhat attractive, but that ugly girl in me was so touched by his words that I almost cried. Story 40. My coworker makes me cups of tea, and I am always incredibly grateful. Tea always tastes better when someone else makes it for you. Story 41. Last year, my dad nearly died of sepsis after an operation to remove a large tumor. He was in the hospital for months. During that time, I was so stressed and depressed that I could barely feed myself and lived on takeaways and ready meals because I just couldn't face cooking or washing up. When I finally could go back to Ireland to visit him, I stayed with my best friend and their partner. They made me a roast dinner with plenty of vegetables. It was the first home-cooked meal I had in 3 months, and I wanted to cry while eating it. It was so good. I don't think they will ever understand how much it meant to me to have someone make me food. Story 42. Since my siblings and I are all adults now, we made it a tradition to drink alcohol as a family on Christmas Eve while playing beer pong. In 2023, I was the only one not drinking. It didn't bother me at all. I don't enjoy drinking that much anymore and can have a great time without it. My brother, however, took me aside for a moment and asked if it was okay that I was the only one not drinking or if I felt uncomfortable. During my childhood, my brother was the most important person in my life. We are like the same person, just 3 years apart, as brother and sister. However, as a brother, he never showed much affection. In that moment when he asked me if I was okay, my heart started to warm. That was true love and care for his little sister. Story 43. Just doing his job. That's all it took. I have been moving between jobs for a couple of decades, trying to figure out what works for me and who actually provides a tolerable atmosphere. I started my current job a little over a year ago and was initially skeptical about how things operated there. I work in receiving and warehousing at a production facility, and they struggled to find any leadership who could effectively run the department. I was transferred between a few managers before landing with this poor choice. The only other 2 members of the department quit at the same time, and the new manager did not help pick up any of the slack. I did not have the computer permissions or authority to perform some of the tasks he was trying to assign to me. He would brush me off when I asked how this was going to work. I did get promoted to lead, but they had hired a supervisor from outside over me, and this manager could not even tell me the details of how that worked. Not even things that impacted my employment, such as my new rate or official start date. Needless to say, I was on the verge of quitting. The former director of operations had just been let go, and the individual they had just promoted was next in line above my manager. He seemed all right, so I approached him as a stressed-out, borderline incoherent mess. Despite having just stepped into the role days before, he actually listened to me and took control of the situation. In the next couple of months, I mostly worked with him while he took over the administrative side of things and slowly cut out the manager. It was glorious. The manager was removed from the department once the new supervisor got up to speed. I received my promotion plus another, much larger role more recently, and the old manager was eventually fired for fostering a hostile work environment. This all turned around to be the best job of my life just because of some competent leadership. Story 44. I burned my wrist accidentally when I was 14, just a few days after my best friend died in an accident. I went to the doctor for the burn, and the nurse examined my injury, looked into my eyes and said, "I heard about your friend, and I'm so sorry. It was a small town, so she knew about it." This was more than anyone else ever said to me about that horrible event. My parents pretended it never happened. I guess they figured I would just get over it. I have never forgotten that kind lady's simple words, and it has been 51 years. Story 45. I was in the hospital with severe pneumonia and the flu, away from my son and undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder. I felt anxious and scared. My sister had braided my hair the night before, and one of the braids came out. The social worker came by to do her rounds and asked if she could braid my hair. That simple act made me feel dignified, calm, and cared for. I didn't tell her I was also a social worker, and I will always remember to slow down and do the small things because you never know how much they can mean to someone. I wish I could thank her again. Story 46. My father had passed away, and I was going through the process of taking care of his estate and closing accounts. One task was to return his driver's license to the motor vehicles department. As I was handing it over to the clerk, the realization of his loss hit me hard. I was giving away something that felt like a part of him. I teared up a little and asked if I could keep the license. She said no, as policy required them to discard it. She offered to cut out just the square with his picture, but it would have been hard to carry around, so I declined. A minute later, she returned, gave me his old license back, and had hole punched a corner to make it invalid. She simply said, "Here you go." I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't even speak to thank her. I just nodded, left, and cried in my car for a very long time. That was back in 2008, and I still get emotional remembering her kindness. Story 47. I am very self-conscious about my teeth, which are reminiscent of Amy Lou Woods. I broke a tooth while eating lunch and felt extremely distressed because I was going to a family wedding. I booked an appointment to see a dentist as soon as possible. I approached my boss, who was a gruff man, and said, "I'm so sorry, but it's urgent. I hate my teeth and need to fix this." He replied calmly, "I've always thought you have lovely teeth and a great smile." And I felt completely overwhelmed in that moment. I think about that comment often, and 8 or 9 years later, I believe I agree with him. Story 48. Kinda strange, but very memorable. I had a hysterectomy in 2021. I was wheeled into surgery, about to be put under. I wasn't scared or worried, but for some reason, I suddenly felt a little uneasy. One of the technicians rubbed the back of my left hand, which I assumed was a soothing gesture as I started to go under. I still remember it now, and it sometimes makes me tear up. It was exactly what I needed in that moment and made me feel safe, especially since it was my first surgery. Story 49. Over a decade ago, I was newly divorced, and my friend, who is now my spouse, drove me home from the emergency room. I had fractured my ankle and was in a boot. He parked the car and got out while I was shuffling with my crutches. When my door opened, he offered his hand. I was so confused and asked him, "What are you doing?" To his credit, he looked at me like I was crazy and said, "I'm opening the door for you." That was a significant change in my perspective because I had never experienced that before. I had never had a moment where I was obviously struggling and had anyone reach out to help me. I immediately felt embarrassed for asking, as it made my situation glaringly obvious. But knowing that someone thought I was worthwhile enough to even open a door for me, looking back, it may seem small, but it meant a great deal to me. Story 50. Growing up, and even now, I sometimes jokingly ask my mom for help with something, and she responds, "Since it's you," with such a sincere tone. She is entering her 70s, and I know I am going to miss hearing that one day. Story 51. Since we started dating, every time I take a sweater off next to him, my boyfriend grabs my shirt underneath to prevent it from riding up and revealing anything. I have told him how much it means to me, but it makes me feel so loved that he recognizes a potential issue and solves it without saying anything. I love him so much. Story 52. When my reenactment group went to Arkansas as performers, it was colder than expected. I was one of the few people without a tent buddy for extra body heat and was the smallest of the solo individuals. I was cold. On the second morning of this suffering, my mentor went to get coffee for himself and his wife. He returned with 3 cups and declared that one was for me. It was likely an afterthought since the coffee seller was offering a discount for vendors, reducing the price from $12 for 2 cups to $9 for 3. But it meant so much to me that someone I admired thought of me. Story 53. Anytime I need help from customer service and they are somewhat sympathetic, I understand their job can be challenging, and people often yell at them. Any bit of kindness means a lot to me, especially since reaching out to them or warranty departments is typically my last resort. Story 54. A bus driver told me my eyeliner wings looked great when I felt really bad about myself after a shift at my job. It has been almost 10 years, and I can't stop thinking about this. It was so sweet. Story 55. I had 2 children under 2 years old. My little one was strapped to my chest as I carried bags and tried to convince my toddler to hold my hand, which was a big no at the time, while navigating a parking lot after a shopping trip. Both boys were fussy, and I felt overwhelmed. My toddler kept trying to pull away and was screaming. A woman looking for a parking spot saw me, stopped her car in the middle of the lane, jumped out, and asked if she could help. She carried my water and bags while I managed my children. As she closed my trunk, she smiled at me and said, "You're a really good mom. Be proud your kids trust you enough to act up." I was too scared of my parents to say anything. That has always stuck with me years later. Story 56. In first grade, I told a girl whose name I can't remember that her bracelet was pretty. Then she handed me the bracelet and told me to put it in the lost and found. I was puzzled, and she said, "That way you don't get in trouble because it's finders keepers." I don't remember the entire interaction, but I know she knew I couldn't accept the item as a gift without getting in trouble. And that was her solution. 25 years later, she remains some of the most concrete proof I have that good people exist among us. Story 57. Growing up, I had absent parents who abused alcohol and pills and did not attend graduations, sports events, or birthdays. A coworker who often clashes with me brought a slice of cake with candles to my desk on my 31st birthday, and it was the very first time I ever blew out candles. He is still self-centered, but deep down, there is a hint of light in him. Story 58. I was probably around 12 or 13. I had pretty bad acne on my forehead, and people would constantly point it out, not maliciously, but I was still very self-conscious about it. I was massively self-conscious about my appearance anyway. One day, my friends and I were standing in a circle just talking, and at some point, one of the popular guys in our class, who was kind of our friend too, came up and joined the conversation. This kid was handsome and well aware of that, and kind of a troublemaker, so I think all of us had a little crush on him. After a while, he said he had to go and started saying goodbye to all of us. The way he decided to say goodbye was by giving each girl in the group a kiss on the forehead. I was mortified and internally freaking out because I knew that he would be grossed out or might hesitate when he got to me, maybe do it out of a sense of obligation, or simply give me a kiss on top of my head, making it obvious that he thought I was gross. Every time he got closer to me, my stomach sank even further, and I honestly considered stepping aside and pretending I was leaving too. Eventually, my turn came, and I couldn't believe it when he didn't miss a step. He gently grabbed my head and kissed my forehead like it was nothing before just moving on. I was in shock. I honestly could not believe it. I didn't really know how to feel, but I was incredibly grateful. I wish I could thank him for that, even to this day. I don't know if he realizes the impact of what he did or what his thought process was. I know for a fact it's not like he didn't notice my acne because it was really bad. I had to go on medication for it, and he would sometimes look at my forehead instead of my eyes when talking to me, so I know he saw it. But the fact that he was pretty young too and acted that kindly, especially when kids at that age aren't that self-aware, really stands out to me. I always felt like the ugly duckling of the group, and that gesture made me feel included, like I was normal. I'm now 26, and it's still one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me. Story 59. I was a tourist in Japan in the middle of summer. I had 2 heavy suitcases because I was in the process of moving my entire life abroad. I felt overheated and a bit stressed about catching my plane and life in general. I understand how frustrating it can be for a tourist to struggle through the station and become a nuisance to commuters. There seemed to be countless stairs between me and my train. I am not very strong and must have looked quite helpless trying to drag my suitcases up the crowded stairs. A man headed to work kindly grabbed my suitcases and carried them to the top of the stairs while smiling at me. I was so flustered that I forgot how to say thank you properly in Japanese, and then he disappeared into the crowd. Many people had walked past me, huffing and puffing, and it was incredibly kind of him to help me at my most vulnerable moment. He made a lasting impression on me, and I wish I could tell him how much his act of kindness meant to me. Story 60. I have been single for a while. One day, I was cleaning out the garage and stepped outside to catch the breeze. A girl drove by and waved at me, and I waved back. She blew me a kiss, and it really felt nice and made my day. Story 61. When my father died, I received a sympathy card from an ex-girlfriend from 23 years ago. It was so touching that someone had reached out with tenderness and thoughtfulness. It was probably the nicest thing I can remember anyone doing. Story 62. I had just moved away from home, started my first real job, and an unexpected change in circumstances meant I was living alone. My living expenses had subsequently doubled, and I had very little disposable income for necessities like basic food. I stayed behind at work and was making calls to customers to book appointments, and the building was virtually empty. My boss suddenly appeared with several bags of shopping for me. Not only did she realize that I was struggling, but she also had the heart to go out of her way to help me and the decency to do it discreetly so as not to embarrass me. Story 63. I have to set the scene to really make a point, so bear with me. I was in my early 20s and my mother had just died. I was in graduate school trying to finish my thesis. I had asked for an extra semester, specifically the summer, to write because I was unable to get anything done due to grief, and my advisor and the school had agreed. I wrote through the spring and was on track to finish by midsummer. About 3 to 4 weeks before the end of the spring semester, the school informed me that I would not be granted an extension of my assistantship, which meant I wouldn't receive the $1,600 monthly stipend that helped pay my rent and keep me afloat, nor would they cover any tuition costs. Thankfully, I only had to take a few research credits to maintain full-time student status, but the lack of a stipend was a significant setback. Prior to this, I had been teaching 2 courses every semester in exchange for that stipend and free tuition. To make matters worse, I had been receiving letters from a student loan company saying I was nearing my borrowing limit. I didn't understand why, as I graduated with about $55,000 in student debt, while others I knew were well over the $100,000 mark. No reasons were provided for the withdrawal of my assistantship. I was a good student, well-behaved, and a quiet person overall, and I didn't cause any trouble. When I spoke to my advisor, he didn't know the reason but gleefully informed me that he would not consider me a full-time student unless I was in the lab, my office, or at home writing at all times. He smiled as he said it. However, since I lived in school housing and now had no income, I needed to find a job. I decided to do so without his knowledge. I had a few horses boarded nearby and worked off their maintenance. My day would start at 6:45 a.m., when I would go out to the barn and do chores, then get to work by 8 a.m. and work until 4:30 or 5 p.m. After that, I would return home, complete barn chores from 5:30 to 7 p.m., and then have a small meal while writing until 1 or 2 a.m. I did this for a few months until I finished my thesis. Since my job was seasonal, I explained my situation to my supervisor, who was understanding. I had to make occasional appearances at the office, so I had to take a day or 2 off to do so. On top of this, my father had sued my brother and me for half of my mother's farm, which delayed wrapping up the estate. I was trying to care for the farm on weekends as best as I could, but it was a 3-hour drive one way. To complicate matters, I was in an extremely unhealthy relationship where my boyfriend was emotionally abusive. I was trying to divide my time and money in too many directions. I barely made $800 a month in my job and struggled to keep my bank balance positive. One day, I was out at the barn, probably looking as tired as I felt, when a fellow boarder came by. She knew a little about my situation. She pulled out a $10 bill and said that their church pastor had given out $10 bills for the congregation to give to those in need. She thought I could use it. I cannot describe the gratitude that $10 bill inspired in me. It allowed me to buy sandwich fixings for the week. It truly helped, and I will never forget how appreciative I was of that. Story 64. So many things can bring a sense of connection. Simple acts include picking up something I dropped, holding a door open, giving a compliment, or doing a favor without being asked. These gestures, like filling a glass a little more at a pub, can spread happiness. When I engage in these actions, I feel compassion and a desire to share joy and uplift others. When others show kindness, it also makes me feel safe in the world, and that is significant. Story 65. When someone I started talking to said hello to me in public, we stopped communicating, but she has no idea how much it meant to me. It had been literal years since that happened to me. Story 66. One time, I invited my friends to hang out on Discord, but when no one replied, I felt down and ended up going out alone instead. The next day, One of my friends messaged me asking where he could deliver the Panda Manila donuts that I had been wanting to try ever since he recommended them. It was such a small gesture, but it meant so much. It wasn't just about the donuts. It was the fact that he remembered something I had mentioned and took the time to follow up, making sure I got something I had been excited about. It was a thoughtful reminder that even when things feel a little off, there are people who really notice and care about the little things. Story 67. A teacher I didn't think was paying much attention asked to talk to me alone to see if I was all right. I had just come out and was not really okay, but I was so surprised that I simply said, of course. It still meant a lot. Story 68. I went to the store yesterday, and there was someone exiting through the front doors. I waited for them to exit first so I could go inside. They gave me the most beautiful, genuine smile, and I couldn't help but smile back. It was just a smile, but I felt so happy for the next hour. Then I found myself smiling at everyone. It's amazing how far something small like that can go. Story 69. At work, a year after my best friend died of cancer, I messaged the wider team about a walk I was doing to raise money for the cancer charity that supported him through his battle. After sending the email, I went to the kitchen area because I wanted to get away and avoid questions. The head of digital walked into the kitchen, gave me a big bear hug, said, "I'm proud of you, buddy," and then walked off. I told him the day I left the company how much it meant to me, and I still think about it today, 5 years later. I didn't realize I needed it at the time, but it really helped me get through that period. Story 70. I was out to lunch with my grandparents and my cousin, celebrating my 9th birthday. It was special to go to a restaurant and see family because my birthday falls the day after a holiday, and everyone is usually too busy to spend time with me. I was already happy, but an elderly woman carrying a bouquet of flowers walked by our table and overheard that it was my birthday. She pulled 2 flowers from the bouquet, gave one to me and one to my cousin. I still think of that whenever I'm sad, and white roses are my favorite flower to this day because of that gesture. I just wish I could thank her again. Story 71. I was 14 and went to my first metal concert with my dad. I was excited and having fun until the mosh pit started right behind me and people kept getting pushed into my back. I got pretty scared. My dad is tall but kind of skinny and was getting ready to move us to the far end of the crowd. Then, a huge man in his 50s noticed the problem and stood about a meter behind me like a tank, keeping the mosh pit away for the rest of the show. It made me feel safe, seen, and supported. It also showed my dad that metal concerts are enjoyable, and he attended many more with me over the next few years. He wasn't even protesting much when I wanted to join the mosh pits because he trusted that people would look out for me, and they always did. Metal fans are the best, and my dad is too. Story 72. 10 years ago, I was getting my hair done with my newborn daughter in tow. She woke up and began to fuss and cry, and I was anxious that the other ladies in the salon would be annoyed. A woman who was a stranger to me asked if she could hold my baby and proceeded to walk around the salon for 45 minutes, softly talking to her and patting her little butt. I was very grateful. When my daughter was 8, we happened to trick or treat at the woman's house. I recognized her and introduced myself and my sweet Leela, telling her how much her kindness had meant to me and that I had thought about her often over the years. She started crying and said she had thought about us often, too. Leela, dressed as a princess, looked back and forth at us, asking why we were sad. We both hugged her and said we were crying happy tears. Story 73. I have had depression since I was a teenager, and in my early 20s it was exceptionally bad. One night, I was very confident that I was going to end my life. I had always fantasized about it, but this was the first time I fully believed I was actually going to. It was terrifying. I was trying to find any possible reason not to, but that night nothing was working. Randomly, a friend of mine sent me a text. He was just saying hello, nothing major. We weren't very close and didn't contact each other often, so it was a surprise to receive a message from him. The surprise of seeing an unexpected message jolted me out of my thoughts and gave me time to calm down. We are not really in contact anymore, but whenever I see him post on social media, I am reminded that I might not be here without that random text. Story 74. I had an interview for a university placement and was supposed to be driving down in a friend's car. However, on the morning of the interview, my friend backed out, leaving me in a panic as I tried to scrape together enough money for a train ticket. Then my mom called. She had bumped into my sister's ex-husband, who was a great guy and with whom we had kept in touch, and mentioned what had happened with my lift. He immediately offered to help and canceled all his plans for the day to drive me there. It was a 3-hour drive, and he even waited for me and drove me back afterward. I ended up getting my placement too. Neil, you're an absolute star, and over 20 years later, I'm still upset with my sister for her affair. You didn't deserve that. Another time, while at university, I was struggling with some health issues and had fallen behind on my coursework, making it impossible to catch up. My tutor took me aside and handed me someone else's work, saying, I'm marking all this work personally. I won't let you fail due to circumstances beyond your control. Use this work as a guide. Don't copy it word for word, but follow it and rephrase it so you have something to present. That one small act saved me from being expelled from university and could have cost him his job. I passed thanks to him. Story 75. I was an exhausted parent with a young child who was having a fierce tantrum on the street. I was sitting a few feet away, feeling frustrated. A young woman walked by, took out a bar of chocolate, and offered it to my child, who immediately sat up and looked at it in surprise. She continued on, and as she passed me, she pulled out another bar of chocolate and handed it to me. Moments later, my child and I were sitting together, leaning on each other and happily enjoying the chocolate. That kind stranger helped me in London in 1973. Story 76. The first time I attended a convention, I wore my pansexual pride pin. I have since realized I am fully gay and was extremely nervous. It was a convention in a liberal city, but I had never experienced anything like that before. When I went to buy a t-shirt, the guy behind the counter smiled and said, "Hey, I like your pin," while handing me my shirt. I thanked him, and that was one of the first times someone positively acknowledged me for not being straight, aside from my parents. To the t-shirt guy from GalaxyCon, if you are reading this, thank you. Also, the shirt is amazing, and my dog keeps stealing it to sleep with. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.